This recording has been made possible by the support of the Collectors Admiralty. The recording has been made with the permission of the original author. For more information about the book or about the Collectors Admiralty, please visit the description box below. Ahmed Farooq's Cosmic Delirium, Chapter 4. Her head rocked and the car jerked along the rocky and cratered road. The raw vocals of Bob Dylan and his soft guitar chords, followed by the sirens of ambulances and fire trucks, poured into Eleanor's ears as she departed for another city with her parents. Her dad would sing along with Bob Dylan as he would rewind and re-listen to the same old song over and over again. Eleanor looked out her window. It was all dusty. Men in greenish-yellow jackets with masks and helmets were moving all over the place, pulling out the wounded from the fallen buildings and collecting pieces of meteorite rocks. Ahead of her was a long row of cars, trucks, vans, all honking violently at each other, as all wished to gain exodus from this place. It seemed as if the city had been cursed and none wanted to be part of it. Eleanor found no bliss within reality. It had been boring and will forever be, no matter how odd the circumstances were. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. The song progressed, and Eleanor fell asleep. For the realm of dreams and fantasy was the place that amused her the most. Her head rocked to and fro, and alas, she was awakened. The sun gently kissed her face as she awoke, opening her eyes lazily and slowly, blinking at intervals. She could hear the strange but familiar melodic chirps of strange birds. Rays of light blinked. She opened her eyes. The forest was dense, vines hung from the trees, yet most of it was blur. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, blinked again, yawned from beneath the shadow of the colossal megalith. She saw a strange figure standing before her, yet she could not properly make out its features. She blinked once more, yawned again, rubbed her eyes. Eek! She shrieked in fear. A titanic man with monstrous arms, beastly legs, and jet-black locks stood close to her, glaring at her with bloodshot eyes as he bore a jeweled yet humongous sword in his hand. He approached slowly yet fiercely, bearing a menacing grimace upon the battle-worn face. His anger made the feeble world around him tremble and caused the faint Eleanor to shrink against the megalith. He pointed the sword at Eleanor and pressed the cold metal against his chin. "Oh, you twisted molecule manipulator," he barked at her. "You have twisted and damaged the fabric of reality. You have toyed with greater things at cosmological levels. Only your death can undo the treachery you have brought upon this universe." Eleanor shriveled as the beast barked at her in a deep thunderous tone. The queer chirping of birds fled from the scene in fear. All had grown silent. The maddening man had grown silent for a brief moment. He looked into her eyes. He could sense fear. She reeked of it. He could smell it. "Be prepared for decapitation, O child. O child, you played God and now you suffer." The beastly bounty hunter bellowed in a thunderous tone as he raised the weapon. Eleanor shut her eyes in fear, hoping to be awakened from the terrible nightmare. Clang! "Who dares interrupt me?" Quite a vivid choice of words, Tengri. I'm impressed. "The callous bounty hunter now wills to save the universe," replied the shadow fiend as it unfurled itself from around the beastly arms of the warrior. "You fool! Do you comprehend the calamity that has befallen us?" Thus speaks the mortal addressing the primal god. "Move out of the way!" The shadow entity coiled itself around the massive legs of the hunter, causing him to trip and fall face first, cracking the scarred, worn-out nose. Thud! "Let go! Let go! Let go, you remnant of days of yore! Your powers are no longer required. Be gone or face death by the blade of shaman magic." The shamans hired you, did they not? What good will come of this abhorrent task? Will it fuel your bloodlust or satisfy your unquenched thirst for the cold flesh of young girls? A menacing spark was ignited in the ice-cold eyes of the hunter. A dangerous grimace possessed his scarred and battle-worn face. He dragged himself up, struggling against the shadow god's grip. He swung his sword in every direction, trying to get a chop off his formless limbs. The god would slither away into darkness, coil around the beast man's stone-hard form, and then force him back, face first hard upon the dirt. Tengri would raise himself up again, dust his titanic limbs, would try to approach the shadow fiend, but would once more fail upon confrontation. Having had taken advantage of the moment, Eleanor trembled back upon her feet. Shuddered in awe, she fled into the distant forest. Panting, she fled from the scene, gladly thanking the unnamed shadow fiend, and now chose to seek sanctum in the greater distance. Trembling, shuddering, running and tripping upon trees, roots, branches, and logs, thorns scarred her and tore the sleeves of her clothes. She advanced deeper into the forest, trembling. The maze seemed never-ending and hopeless. The forest seemed hostile, and unwelcomed was her presence within it. It seemed to close in, concealing her from the sky and darkening everything around her. The trees seemed to be passing angered gazes at her, and it seemed as if the cold breeze was the heartless throe of death and despair being hurled at her from the forest itself. Abhorrent and frightful was the atmosphere, and all grew dark. Eleanor shuddered, grew numb and cold in fear. When all had grown dark, she saw a faint bluish glow in the distance. She followed only to know that the light she was following was not from the world outside the forest, but was upon something miles above her head. She still followed it. Ouch! She wept as the thorns scarred her skin and pulled her hair. Thump! Eleanor had bumped into a tree. She looked up, and there it was. The light was right above her head. It was hung from a tree like a fruit, and the tree alone held it, up and high. Having had arrived at the colossal tree, she halted and rested with her back against it. She gasped for air as her heart pounded against its skeletal cage. Having had gained a minor satisfaction of her exodus from the grips of the treacherous fate at the hands of the bounty hunter, she sighed as she seated herself upon the cold grass. Exhausted, she chose to rest and take solace in the thought that the shadow fiend must have had finished him off, and both the hunter and the god would no longer trouble her. From rent asunder came faint cries of struggle, quarrel, and menacing laughter. The shadow god came flying at her like an arrow, laughing. Tengri was at its tail, cursing and frowning. The shadow monster coiled itself around Eleanor and took her up the monstrous tree. Swoosh! With tremendous speed, the shadow entity carried the poor girl up against the wooden and leafy titan. They did not halt. Air and falling leaves struck hard against her face. Veins, branches, and twigs scarred her feet and elbows, yet the godly being dragged her upwards callously without any show of emotion. The wind roared violent whispers of turbulence as they surged upwards, and soon great cacophony erupted as a result of the never-ending quest to get Eleanor to a safer spot. She looked back and saw the muscular warrior climbing up the tree, chasing the queer duo, but he lagged far behind due to the limitations imposed upon the mortal strength. They rushed upwards. Eleanor squinted as she looked above her, as cold wind came crashing down upon her face. The orb had grown brighter and brighter. She looked down and saw the hunter had given in and had soon vanished. "Fear not, O merry child gifted with prowess," hissed the shadow entity. "The hunter has departed. He lacks the strength to climb to the top of this tree." Bump! They came to a jerky halt. They had approached the light. It was a bright orb, the size of a baseball. It was hanging upon a nearby branch. The shadow entity placed the confused girl upon the nearby branch, uncoiled itself, and curled toward the candescent orb, and soon approached it. Upon approaching the brilliant radiance, he unfurled himself and took the form of a mighty bird, with magnificent talons and distant wings. It screeched, changed its form, morphed into different shapes, hissed, shrieked, growled, twisted himself around the orb, and pulled it off its branch. He now brought the orb to Eleanor, folding himself around the branches, twisting, turning, furling, and unfurling. He softly yet silently moved into her and possessed her. With her pale, feeble hands, he pushed the orb into her pocket and soon used her physical form to climb up the last remaining branches to the top of the tree. He smirked and giggled and soon came out through her mouth. Eleanor gasped and shrieked at the bizarre and lurid sensation beyond her comprehension and beyond describable words. "We rest here, O child," he spoke to her. "We depart tomorrow. The maiden awaits thy arrival. But be wary of that orb. It's a threat to my existence. Use it only if you encounter my kind that shows indifference to your presence." Eleanor nodded in approval, but still remained puzzled. "Rest here, child. Sleep now, for we voyage tomorrow. Sleep, child." Eleanor gulped. She lay down on the branch with her head resting upon her curled arms. She closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. The worries of the bizarre wonder world soon left her and morphed into pleasant slumber. Her head jerked to and fro, honks of cars and the roars of engines grew louder. Awakened within her car, her dad frantically darted his head left and right, helplessly trying to find a way out of the oceans of steel and rubber. Eleanor sighed, nodded away the urge to sleep that remained within her, and patiently waited for the tiresome journey to end. She could feel a slight sensation of burning pain upon her wrists, arms, and legs. Slightly folded her sleeves, she saw fresh scars. End of chapter 4.